Good morning, boys. I think it's time to call 2020 what it is. A huge mistake. Let's just try and forget about it. But it's actually, for me personally, not the worst year I've had. I've had a few bad years, but I think 1996, the year after I left school, was the worst year for me. When I ended up being a full-time front counter worker at McDonald's in Masterton. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, let me say that. It's honourable, hard work, okay, especially when things are busy. But I was earning the minimum wage, which in those days was $8.41 an hour. My take-home pay, after I'd paid tax, was usually $200 and something a week, depending on how many hours I'd worked. I remember, after getting my first paycheck, I bought myself a toasty pie machine, a toasted sandwich machine, because I thought this is probably going to be my main meal when I'm earning $8.41 an hour. I'm probably going to only be able to afford to eat toasted sandwiches from now on. But after 6 months of working there at McDonald's, I then found a new job. And the new job paid the princely sum of $9.10 an hour. And I was working at the Duke-and-Nisho sawmill just outside of Masterton. You've probably seen it on your right as you head to Wellington. Now, not long after I started at the Duke-and-Nisho sawmill, did they start putting us on 12-hour shifts. So 1 week, we'd have to start and arrive ready to work by 5 in the morning, and we'd work from then all the way through until 5 at night. The next week, we'd have to change shifts, and we'd have to arrive at 5 at night and work all the way through the night and go finish our shift at 5 in the morning. They also, because they were so busy, asked us to do an extra 8-hour shift on Saturday as well. So 5 days of 12-hour shifts and then an 8-hour shift on the weekend. Now, the hardest part about this job was the boredom. My job was basically to pick up a piece of wood and put it on a conveyor belt. There was a little more to it than that, but for about 12 hours a day, I did this. The boredom was so bad at the sawmill that guys were constantly cutting their fingers off with saws and getting their arms ripped off, and I literally mean arms ripped off in machines, because they were half asleep most of the time and not concentrating. But the hardest part of that job wasn't so much the 70 hours a week of utter boredom and hopelessness. It was when my friends, who were all at university, came back and told me how much fun they were having and what a huge party university was. I felt like their lives had gone on to bigger and better things, while mine had gone backwards. I guess it was summed up for me best that year when I was still working at the McDonald's and a kid came in and ordered his Big Mac, and I asked him, would you like fries with that? And he had been a junior when I had been at Waikol, and he said to me, didn't you used to be the head boy? Look at you now, what a loser. Now, that was a humbling moment for me. I had to say, thank you, sir, have a nice day. The worst part of this was that it hadn't been my choice for things to end up like this. It's a long story, and probably I don't need to go into it, but I'd ended up in this situation because I'd tried to do the right thing by somebody else, and that had backfired on me. Instead of life going on towards the great plans that I'd made for my life, where I saw myself having a great future going on to bigger and better things, things ended up going backwards, and I ended up in what I felt was a very difficult place. And this was my first introduction to the 4th lesson of initiation. We've been looking at the lessons of male initiation, or initiation of anyone into adulthood. The first was life is hard. The second was you are not important. The third was your life is about other people. The 4th lesson is you are not in control. No matter what plans we have or what our intentions are, the world is not under our control. And the unexpected can and will happen in our lives. In fact, by coincidence, if you like, the very week I was meant to write this sermon was the week that we were then put back down into level 2 lockdown, and we had a lot of events cancelled. And then in the same week, I ended up getting an infection on my finger and having to go to hospital and having to take the whole week off, so I couldn't even deliver this sermon as I would normally have done. It's the perfect example that we are not in control. Things bigger than us and outside of our control will happen, and they happen all the time, in big ways and in small ways, like a family member getting sick, even as something as simple as the power going out or the internet going down when we really need it. And I know, boys, that is the worst situation for you, the internet going down. Or even if we're just getting a flat tire when we're already late to something. Things are not in our control. And those who haven't been taught this lesson and taught how to deal with this fact remain children. And what do children do when things don't go their way? They have a tantrum. And boys, how disappointing it is to see young men or women your age throw a tantrum when things don't go their way. It's completely immature and inappropriate. Even worse when it's an adult. People rage and whine, or they try and manipulate things to get what they want when they haven't learned this lesson. And if this behavior doesn't get addressed and doesn't change, then in adulthood it can harden into a full-on rage and controlling other people through violence and anger. It can lead to domestic violence, abuse of spouses and children. A boy cannot become a man if he tries to control everything. It's a very ugly quality. Perhaps like me, you've known people, you know people who always have to get their way. They're always trying to subtly manipulate people in situations to get what they want. And when they don't get what they want, they often fly into a rage. Being controlling is very ugly, and it pushes people away. And it stems from the fear of things being out of your control. And until we face the truth that things are not in our control, we can't be a good friend, a good spouse, a good husband, or a good parent. You're not in control. You can't control the weather. You can't control the economy. You can't control other people or random events. But there is one vital thing that you can control: your reaction to things. The most powerful thing you have in your life, boys, is a gap. A little gap. It's a very small gap. It's so small, most people don't even realize that this gap is there. And some people say that it's not there at all. Some people deny there is this little gap in their lives. It's the gap between the things that happen to us and our reaction to them. And it's in that gap that we must learn to have control. The power of how you use that gap is the power you have over your own life. If you have no power over that gap, then you have no power over your life. When little children get into fights or they do something wrong, they say, "It's not my fault I hit him because he called me weird. It's not my fault I broke that because you made me angry." Unfortunately, I still hear that from teenagers. It's not my fault because this happened and that made me do it. You are not in control of anything except yourself. So, you are not a victim. We all have that gap between what happens and our reaction to it. And it's in that gap that we have choice, that we have freedom, that we have the power to decide who we will be and how we will respond to the world. And the best thing we can do is to make that gap bigger. When someone makes us angry, stop. Take a deep breath. Think, I have a choice here. And I will be held responsible for how I choose to respond. When something goes wrong, don't panic. Breathe. Give yourself space. Give yourself enough of a gap to think, to remember that you were never in control of the situation anyway. And then choose the course of action that's best for you and for everyone else. If you don't create this gap and use it, then you become a slave to your emotions, a slave to circumstances, to old patterns of behavior. If you don't use that gap to choose a good response, then you remain a child, reacting and having a tantrum when things don't go your way. Because life is not always going to go our way. But we can be calm and we can trust. And that's another word for having faith, to trust. We can have faith or trust that we will be able to face and deal with whatever comes our way. We can trust or have faith that life is good, even though it's uncertain. We can trust and have faith that by constantly making wise choices, we will create good things for our lives. I want to finish by reading a poem called Invictus. And the theme of this poem is this whole message that while we cannot control external circumstances, we still can be in control of our lives. And it goes like this. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.